Jazz harmony is beautiful and it's always fascinated me. Artists like Herbie Hancock, Jordan Rakei, Robert Glasper, and the list goes on and on. And the reason is that it makes me feel a wider spectrum of emotions than other styles of harmony. And as an artist and a musician, it kind of invites other ways of expressing yourself, creative freedom, and just ways to really connect to harmony in a very cool, free flow kind of way. But it's fucking hard. And that's why in this video, I'm going to show you how to hack jazz like this. Hey yo, I'm Alex from Edit My Music. I'm a musician, producer, and certified audio engineer here to help you level up your music, unlock your creativity, and make music your life. I've been playing guitar for 15 plus years, but never quite got jazz. I'm much more of a rocker and riffer than a jazzy vibe shaman. So what makes jazz so hard? Well, what makes jazz tricky is the fact that we're usually changing keys and borrowing chords. And in simple terms, you won't be able to play a single scale over an entire chord progression. In a diatonic key center like major or minor, you can usually play the entire 7-note scale throughout the whole tune. And although some notes will introduce more tension than others over different chords, for the most part, they will all work. So to start out, I'm just going to do a quick jam in A minor so you can hear what I'm talking about. Okay, so with this device called Push, I have it set up in the A minor scale so that our dark pink pads are our root note of A, and all of the lit up pads represent the scale of A minor. Okay, and if I'm jamming around in this key, I can pretty much hit all of the notes in A minor and it's gonna sound pretty good. Right? Everything is good, but notice what happens when I step outside of those pads. All right, we're back home. Now we start to get spicy when we step outside of the key. So for jazz, not only do you have to know the note names and the chords, you also have to know what scales will work over what chords and interpret that live as you play without sounding like a calculated robot, sound robot. So to be honest, it wasn't until I started learning jazz harmony on Push that it started to sink in for me. I just learned chords of a few jazz standards like Autumn Leaves, Blue Bossa, and Cantaloupe Island to start to get my hands under some jazz harmony. So for example, in the jazz standard Autumn Leaves, we go through quite a few chord changes. So to show you, we start off in C minor 7, right? Then we go to this F dominant, then this B flat major 7, E flat major 7, then down to this A minor 7 flat 5 to this D dominant with the flat 9 on top, finally to this G minor 6, okay? And to be able to improvise over this, you have to be aware of those chords. And in the song, the chords change quite a bit. But if you hold a sustain pedal and outline the chord tones, you can start to hear the harmony of this piece and almost get away with looking like you know what you're doing. So, for example, if I just hold the sustain pedal and go through these chord tones, you'll start to hear the harmony of this piece. But hold on, put on the brakes. We're not here to learn jazz. We're here to hack jazz. Kidding, not kidding, kidding. So if you're not yet familiar with the basics of music theory and you want to learn your chords and scales, definitely check out this video playlist that covers that topic in depth. Another really cool tune is called Blue Bossa, and that's another jazz standard. If I share my Push 2, I'm not going to go over all the chords in this tune, but I want to highlight to you that when I switch scales at the right time over these chords, that it lands, and this has all the sweet, lovey-dovey, jazz, warm-hearted goodness. All right, so I'm just gonna play through the basic outlines of these chords while playing different scales over them so you can hear this kind of jazz harmony. At Metamind Music, we believe that music isn't just about sound. It's about discovery and transformation. This is a community for visionary creators who want to go beyond the ordinary and go deep into their art and create timeless music that truly matters. We prioritize you, your vision, your growth, and where you're at on your creative journey. With weekly live calls, free resources, and a focus on personal transformation, we're here to help you unlock the best version of yourself through your music. If that resonates with you, click the link below to join us, and let's create something truly extraordinary together. And now, back to the video. Jazz is fun, but let's talk about hacking jazz, because to play this, you do need to know a decent amount of theory, but there's a stepping stone that you can use to hack jazz harmony and feel what it's like to improv without having to know any theory. And to do this, we'll be using Ableton and Push. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and build this setup from scratch so you can follow along if you wanna hack some jazz. All right, so let's go ahead to Ableton. And right now I just have one track with this beautiful piano sound on top. So the first thing we're gonna do is going to add the chords that we want for this progression. Now you can look up the chords that you would like for any tune, or you could use a tool like Scalar 2, which will give you the chords. So Scalar 2 is a great tool to not only learn theory, but as a sequencer and as something to help you with your compositions. It's really a Swiss Army knife. But in this case, we're just gonna go to songs and we're gonna go to jazz, and we're gonna find a jazz progression that we can use to hack it. Okay, so let's go for 11th jazz. Let's check it out. This is what it sounds like. Cool, I like the sound of that. Sounds pretty jazzy to me. So what we can do is simply click and drag these little boxes to our little track with our piano, and all of the MIDI will follow along. Very simple. So now if we exit out of Scalar, right, and we go back to our piano track, now whenever I click these little buttons, which are clips in session view of Ableton, it will play that chord over and over in a loop, okay? So that is step one. The next thing we want to do is play around with the scale settings in Ableton. So if you didn't notice that on Push 2, I have scale settings that depending what I set my scale to, the pads will change themselves accordingly. So in this case, we have C major. I could go to G Mixolydian and the pads will change. So on and so forth, okay? So these scale settings will directly affect Push, and you can change them directly in Ableton, okay? So Ableton 12 has actually a global scale setting up here, but we can change the setting per clip, okay? So if we go ahead and double click on this clip, we can see that there's a scale setting for each clip right here, right? Right now it's in G Dorian. So the goal here is to change the scale setting for each of these clips, which each have one chord on them, so that it will change my device, Push in this case, to match the scale that will work for that chord. Now, how do you figure out what scale works with what chord? Well, here's where Scalar can come in to help us yet again. So let's go ahead and open it up, and let's check out our first chord. So a C minor 11, you could deduce that a C minor scale would work over this, and that is a great starting point. Another thing you could do if you're using Scalar is to right click and go to Explore Scales, and it will show you a bunch of different scales that work over this chord, okay? So this is where you can have fun and check out all sorts of different scales and how it overlaps with a specific chord, which can lead to a ton of interesting voice leading harmony, etc. But in this case, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to go to C and we're going to do C minor, okay? So now that we know our scale for this chord, let's go back over here Gonna move scalar out of the way. And let's choose the scale for this clip to be C minor. Okay, and now you'll notice that if I go back to my overhead, this has changed to C minor. Right? So now anytime that this clip is selected in Ableton, okay, it will change the scale setting on my device to whatever we set it. In this case, it's C minor. Okay, so let's continue to do that for the rest of our chords. Okay, so if I go back to Ableton here, we have a B major sharp 11, B major 9 sharp 11. Sounds like this. Nice chord, right? So let's explore scales and let's go ahead and stay diatonic for now. So let's go to B and we have B Lydian and B Lydian sharp 6. Just to keep things simple, let's go for B Lydian. Okay, so we're going to go to our second chord here, double click on it, and we're going to change this to B Lydian. Okay, and you don't have to know what these are. Again, check out that other video or my playlist if you want to know more about what these scales are. But for now, we're hacking jazz, right? So let's go to our third chord, A sharp minor 11. Again, we're going to explore scales. Let's go to A sharp to keep it simple. And we're going to go with B flat minor, right? Or A sharp minor. Fair enough. Cool. Let's change this to B flat or H sharp minor. Fantastic. Now, whenever we select a clip in Ableton, it's going to change the settings on push, right? So if I click these different clips, you can notice that my push changes scale settings, and we've set a scale that has the right root note and some sort of scale that works over the chord. Great. But now we need to automate these clips to play. If I go ahead and trigger this clip, it's just going to loop over and over again until I trigger another clip. Right? And that's fine and dandy, but I don't want to have to be triggering these things manually. I kind of want this progression to play through itself by itself. So this is where follow actions come in. So Ableton can automatically trigger clips or groups of clips, which are called scenes, based on clips and scenes. I know that sounds crazy. Let me show you what I mean. So the follow actions command is both on the scene control and the clip control. So for example, on this clip up here, we have these follow actions. Right? If we go over here to launch, right? We have follow actions where I could tell this clip that after it's done playing to go ahead and play the next clip, right? So if I play the top one now, notice that it automatically plays the second one, right? And that's because I enabled a follow action on this top clip. Now, instead of doing this per clip, what I want to do is do it per scene, which is a group of clips, and this will make sense later. So the same thing happens. We just have to select our main track or our master track in this case and do the same thing. So on this first scene, what I want to happen is that after it plays through, I want it to trigger the next scene down. Okay, and the same is true with scene 2. And you'll notice I've set this up already by toggling this button. This is off, this is on. And so scene 1 is going to trigger the next scene after playing through once. Same thing with scene 2, scene 3, scene 4, scene 5, scene 6, and scene 7. And they're all the same, except for this one, I want to be 2 bars instead of 1. Okay, so all of these other scenes will wait 1 bar before triggering the next scene. And then the last chord of our progression, the 7th chord, will last 2 bars. Okay, so now we can trigger all of these clips one after another based upon the scenes and their follow actions. But the problem here is that this just plays the clips one after another. We still need to select these clips, right? Because if I bring up my hands and I play through these clips, it doesn't select them, right? I need to select the clip for it to update on my push. Same here. This has to be selected to update. And when I play through these scenes, notice that it doesn't select the clips. So nothing changes here. So we need to fix that problem, and that's where automatic clip selection comes in. So to do this, we're going to use CliffX Pro, which is a custom programming language for Ableton to program clips to trigger automations such as select itself once the trigger plays. So real quick, if I go to my settings and I go to MIDI, I have CliffX Pro, which I'll put in the link description if you want to check it out, which is a super handy MIDI script that you can use with Ableton to use clips to program functions in Ableton. And then, so I'm just going to X out of here, stop the clips. And the way that it works is that you just simply have to rename the clip with whatever function that you want. So for example, on this first clip, if I zoom in over here, hold it, right? like on this first clip, I just have to right click and rename this thing. And I could go put those brackets as an identifier. Right now, we'll leave it blank. And for now, let's go metro on. Okay. And if I do that, notice that right now my metronome is off. But notice as soon as I triggered that clip, the metronome got turned on. And I could do something similar here where I rename this to metro off. And now if I trigger this clip, notice that the metronome gets turned off. Okay, so that's how we're leveraging this scripting clip language to manipulate functions in Ableton. Now, we don't need the metronome. What we want is to select each clip as it gets triggered. So all we got to do is rename this, okay, and go cell, which means select, and then tell it what clip you want to select. So in this case, 1, and it's going to be the same thing for each other clip. In this case, it's going to be cell 2, right? And so on and so forth for the rest of these clips. So now we can jam. So the beauty of this is now we can jam in key with whatever chord is happening throughout our progression. And personally, I like to stay in chromatic mode because you can start to learn things a little bit deeper versus if we go to in key mode, these will just automatically update to whatever scale that we have selected. But I like to be able to see what's happening. Okay. All right. So now we have the ability to jam pretty free form just by following the scales that are presented to us throughout this progression. So let me give you a quick demo of what that looks like. All right, so let me give you some quick tips to quickly get your jazz under your hands to get some jazz hands, okay? So a good place to start is to end your phrase on the root note of the chord and see how it changes relative to the next chord. So let me show you what I mean. So in this case, these pink pads are the root note on whatever chord that we are playing. So as you're jamming around, it's very useful to land on the root note of the chord that you're on currently and see how the relationship changes to the next chord. So let me demo that for you. So I'll just play around. I'm going to make sure to land on these pink squares no matter where they populate before the next chord comes in. So notice that sometimes it's super awesome and harmonized, and sometimes it's a little bit more chromatic. And that way you're learning the relationship of like the root note of the previous chord into this new scale that you're going to. And sometimes you'll notice that it just changes the relationship. Like as the scale changes, that the note you're holding as a root note will change to be a different note in that other scale. But you'll also notice that sometimes if you're holding the root note and then the scale changes, that the root note is actually outside of the scale that we chose for that chord, which indicates that there's maybe a little bit more of an extreme change of harmony happening there. So next thing to try is to try and play all the chord tones of each chord and finish on the root note. You can play on top of the same track with the chord clips if you want a guideline, okay? So let me actually just show you this with this track. So as I press play, you'll notice that the green pads light up of the actual chord, okay? So this kind of makes it paint by the numbers, but you can pretty much just hit those green pads in whatever rhythmic way that makes sense, and then just try targeting the pink pad to end your phrases. So this makes it kind of fun, but you can start to learn some of the patterns and just hit the chord tones, and you'll see how the harmony starts moving, similar to what we did earlier in this video with Autumn Leaves. Okay, so let's give it a shot. Fun stuff. So next, try to just land on a fifth while targeting some chord tones. So what does this mean? A fifth, essentially from a root note, is a distance of this going up or like this going down, okay? So basically you're trying to land a fifth away from the root note as you're jamming out, which will lead to different voice leading possibilities. So let's go ahead and give it a go. Finally, find the common tones. So with any kind of chord progression, most likely there will be a couple tones or 3 tones that work throughout the whole progression. So if you find those tones, you can pretty much play them and anchor and create a theme that will use those same notes and anchor us to a familiar melody as the harmony is changing. And aside from the first chord, which has those 2 tones, every other chord will have those 2 tones. So as I'm improvising, I can definitely anchor on this tone, okay? And for 6 out of the 7 chords, this one, and just the first one, this one. So we can kind of craft a melody or a theme as we're jamming through these progressions. All right, so let's give this a go. If you hit some chord tones and continue to anchor to the common tones throughout the whole progression, you can start to sound like you know what you're doing in the jazz world. Voila, you have officially hacked jazz. Now, this is a great tool to play around with jazz harmony and start learning it, start getting it under your fingers and feel the push and pull of this harmony. But if you really want to level up your understanding of harmony, start with the foundations in this video, and I will see you in that video.